Title: The Symphony of Ruin. Description: in the silent ruins of a dead civilization, humanity discovers a weapon the universe was never meant to hear. Hashtag HFY, hashtag sci-fi, hashtag alien invasion. The silence was the first thing she noticed, a physical weight pressing against her eardrums. Elara Voss stood at the edge of the chasm, the wind carrying the faintest echo of a melody only she seemed to perceive. Below, the city of the ancients sprawled like a fallen god's ribcage, its crystalline spires jutting from the dust like broken teeth. Her boots crunched on gravel as she stepped forward, the translator around her neck humming softly, its sensors straining to parse the dead air. "No readings," she murmured, her voice swallowed by the emptiness. Just quiet. The ruins had been silent for millennia, untouched by time or trespassers, until her team arrived. Now, the only sound was the whisper of her own breath and the low thrum of the device at her belt, a prototype designed to bridge the gap between human and alien tongues. She didn't know yet that the gap wasn't a void but a wall, and that the wall was listening. The air grew colder as Elara descended into the city's heart, the crystalline structures glowing with a faint internal light. Her team's footsteps echoed unnaturally, each sound amplified by the unnatural stillness. "Kale, you seeing this?" she whispered into her comms. A static-filled hiss was her only reply. Ahead, a plaza stretched into the gloom, its center dominated by a towering obelisk covered in spiraling glyphs. The translator whined, its display flickering with fragmented symbols. "It's trying to speak," Elara breathed, running her fingers over the etched surface. The glyphs pulsed under her touch, warm and alive. Then, a sound, a chord, deep and resonant, shattered the silence. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated in her bones, a note that felt both ancient and hungry. The light in the plaza dimmed, and the shadows between the spires seemed to deepen. She looked back, but her team had vanished. Elara spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Kale? Jax? Report." Only silence answered, broken by the distant hum of the translator, now screaming with static. The plaza was empty, but she could feel eyes on her, not with sight, but with something else. A presence. The obelisk pulsed again, and the glyphs rearranged themselves, forming a pattern that made her head ache. She pulled her pistol, its weight unfamiliar in her shaking hand. "I don't know who you are," she said, her voice The beings advanced, their light blinding but not hot. Elara stumbled backward, her boots slipping on the polished stone. The translator at her belt emitted a piercing shriek, and for a moment, the light beings faltered, their forms flickering. "It's affecting them," she realized, a desperate hope blooming in her chest. She fumbled with the device, its casing warm to the touch. The glyphs on the obelisk pulsed in time with the translator's hum, and the light beings recoiled, their radiance dimming. One of them let out a sound, a high, discordant note that made her teeth ache. "You understand me," she whispered, though she knew they couldn't. The translator was parsing something, a language beyond human comprehension, and in that parsing lay power. She raised her hands, mimicking the being's gestures, and the translator whined louder. The plaza erupted in light, and the ground cracked beneath her feet. Elara fell, the world dissolving into blinding white. When her vision cleared, she was no longer in the plaza. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, and the ruins around her were twisted, alien. The obelisk was gone, replaced by a forest of crystalline trees, their branches weaving together overhead. The light beings were everywhere now, their forms swirling like auroras. One drifted closer, its light softening. It extended a hand, and Elara hesitated, the translator buzzing in her pocket. "What do you want?" she asked, though she knew the answer wasn't words. The being pulsed, and a melody filled the air, not a song, but a language of pure emotion. Joy, sorrow, fear, all woven into a tapestry of sound that made her weep. She reached out, and her fingers passed through its light, cold as starlight. The beings withdrew, their light dimming, and the forest fell silent again. The silence was different this time, deeper, more intentional. Elara stood alone in the twisted forest, the translator clutched in her hand. Its display showed a single glyph, repeating endlessly. She pressed it, and the air shimmered. The light beings reappeared, their forms sharper now, their light edged with something that looked like anger. One of them raised a hand, and a wave of force slammed into her, throwing her against a crystalline tree. Pain lanced through her shoulder, but she didn't cry out. Instead, she focused on the translator, humming a tune she'd learned as a child, a lullaby her mother used to sing. The light beings froze, their light flickering. The melody wasn't in their language, but it resonated, a human counterpoint to their alien symphony. They lowered their hands, their light softening. "We're not enemies," she said, though she wasn't sure if they understood. The forest began to shift around her, the crystalline trees bending like reeds. The light beings moved in unison, their light pulsing in a rhythm that mirrored her own heartbeat. Elara stood, her shoulder throbbing, and raised the translator again. This time, she didn't press a button. Instead, she spoke, her voice raw with emotion. "I'm sorry," she said. "We didn't mean to disturb you." The translator absorbed her words, translating not the meaning, but the feeling behind them: loneliness, curiosity, regret. The light beings pulsed in response, their light brightening. One of them drifted forward, its light warm now, and touched her forehead. A flood of images filled her mind, cities of light, civilizations rising and falling, the slow death of their star. She gasped, stumbling back. They weren't invaders. They were guardians. The ground trembled, and the forest began to collapse. The light beings' forms flickered, their light dimming. "They're fading," Elara realized, a cold dread spreading through her. The translator's display showed a new glyph, one she'd never seen before. She pressed it, and a wave of energy surged from the device, wrapping around the nearest light being. Its light stabilized, and it turned to her, its radiance filled with gratitude. The others followed suit, their forms solidifying. The trembling stopped, and the forest stilled. The light beings gathered around her, their light weaving together into a canopy of warmth. One of them extended a hand, and this time, Elara took it. The translator hummed, a bridge between two worlds, two languages. "We'll protect you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was reassuring. The ruins began to change, the crystalline structures reshaping themselves around her. The light beings guided her through the city, their light illuminating paths she hadn't seen before. The translator pulsed in her hand, its display showing glyphs that now made a kind of sense. Not translation, but conversation. They were teaching her. One of them gestured to a wall, and the glyphs there rearranged themselves into a pattern that looked like a map. "Home," it seemed to say. Elara traced the lines, her fingers trembling. The light beings had been waiting for someone like her, someone who could listen, not just hear. The city's silence wasn't emptiness. It was a pause, a breath between notes in a symphony only now beginning again. The light beings gathered around her, their light merging into a single, radiant being. It pulsed, a question in its light. Elara looked at the translator, then at the being, and smiled. "We'll stay," she said, her voice steady. "We'll learn." The being's light brightened, and the city around them hummed with a new energy, alive, but not threatening. The translator's display showed a final glyph, one that meant beginning. Elara closed her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't just hear the silence. She heard the music. The Symphony of Ruin had become a song of hope, and she was its first note.